Now, Justice Jackson left us nearly 60 years ago. It is natural to ask, if we were to invite him to the court today, what he would think about how it has evolved over the past 6 decades. Now, we know that Justice Jackson was never one to waste a moment, and if we invited him, he would be at the court first thing tomorrow morning. Upon his arrival at the court plaza, he would encounter his first shock. The front facade of the building is currently wrapped in a giant scrim, a drape, hiding scaffolding and an ongoing marble restoration project. The building, which was a mere 6 years old when he joined the court, is currently undergoing an exterior renovation to repair the effects of Washington weather on the beautiful Vermont marble. Now, once Jackson recovered from that shock, he would encounter another. The building is closed on Saturdays. This is a sharp departure from the practice during his tenure, when the court was open 6 days a week and the justices always set aside Saturday to discuss cases at their weekly conference. Now, I don't mean to suggest that the justices today don't work on Saturdays, just that the building itself is not open to the public. So if Justice Jackson were to wait until Monday morning to come to the court, he would need to arrive a little bit earlier than usual. The court now convenes for business at 10 a.m. rather than at noon as it had during his tenure. He may also want to allow time for a stop at the court's public cafeteria. We know from his papers that Justice Jackson was fond of the cafeteria manager's specialties. The justices today continue to partake of the same fare that is offered to the public. Unfortunately, the legendary cafeteria manager of Justice Jackson's days, Mrs. Mertens, is gone, and her famous Alabama Pronto Pups are off the menu. But we have now panini sandwiches and frozen yogurt at steeply higher prices that would certainly have offended Justice Jackson's thrifty Western New York sensibilities. Now, when Jackson proceeds upstairs to his chambers, he is in for another shock. His office, which was located on the northeast side of the building, is now occupied by one of Justice Thomas's law clerks. During the 1950s, when the justices typically had just one law clerk, the justices' chambers were located in the back of the building. Now, over time, the number of law clerks expanded to 4, and in 1972, the court renovated and expanded the existing chambers to provide more space. It correspondingly added new chambers to the front of the building, where Justices Kennedy, Breyer, and Kagan now reside. The views of the Capitol from those chambers are absolutely spectacular, except not right now. If you've been paying attention, you'll recall that those views are now blocked by scaffolding and a scrim. Now, with all of these surprises, Justice Jackson might be ready to seek quiet refuge in the court's library. He would find that the library's beautiful reading room looks remarkably familiar, except for one significant matter. There are no people there, other than the dedicated library staff. Most of the law clerks do their research now from computer terminals in their offices. Now, of course, the justice would need a little briefing on what computer terminals are as well. At 9:55 in the morning, Justice Jackson would hear the familiar buzzer indicating that the court will convene shortly and it's time to proceed to the robing room. From there, it's a short walk across the hall to the courtroom. That has changed little in appearance since 1954. The drapes and the carpet are still a deep burgundy. But Justice Jackson would notice a significant difference in the shape of the mahogany bench behind which the 9 justices sit. In Jackson's era, the bench was straight from end to end. But now the end segments join the center at slight angles, creating a curved bench. Chief Justice Warren Burger implemented this change in 1972 to enable the justices to see one another during argument. It also has the effect of partially surrounding arguing counsel, just in case they were not intimidated enough already. Justice Jackson would also note that the 4 small desks, which were previously in the well of the court in front of the bench, were gone. In Justice Jackson's time, when decisions were announced, they were literally handed down to court reporters sitting at those desks. Those reporters would then roll up the opinions and place them in bullet-shaped cylinders. Insert the cylinders into pneumatic tubes which would convey the opinions downstairs to the wire service reporters. Those reporters would then use that hard copy to write their stories. Now, when the court announces its decision, it simply posts them simultaneously on the court's website. When the court strikes 10 a.m., the court takes the bench. When the clock strikes 10 a.m., the court takes the bench just as punctually as in Jackson's day. But the composition of the court is strikingly different. In Jackson's day, the court consisted of 9 men. The 9 came from different parts of the country. It was still customary for the president to strive for regional diversity when nominating justices. But remarkably, at that time, only one of the justices, Sherman Minton, had significant experience as a judge prior to joining the court. By contrast, the current court includes 3 women, and 8 of the 9 members were judges before becoming Supreme Court justices. That's a change in the background of the justices that many have suggested has altered how the justices view their work. Now, being a Monday, Justice Jackson would expect to hear the announcement of opinions, because in his day, opinions were announced only on Mondays. But Chief Justice Warren changed that practice in 1965, and now opinions can be announced any day that the court is sitting. Under our current practice, the court rarely announces opinions on Mondays if it is also hearing arguments on that day. Justice Jackson, as a former Solicitor General, would probably be most interested in the changes in how the court currently conducts oral argument. The Solicitor General is, of course, the federal government's lawyer in the Supreme Court and presents the government's arguments there. Jackson once described his tenure as Solicitor General as the happiest period of his public life. In Jackson's day, the court typically allowed 2 hours for argument, 1 hour for each side. That changed in 1970, when Chief Justice Burger reduced the time to 30 minutes per side. Now, that change has dramatically affected the style of the arguments. Counsel can no longer use their time to engage in a relatively leisurely discourse with the court. The justices are anxious to reach the heart of the dispute quickly, and counsel must be prepared for aggressive questioning from the bench. I believe that Justice Jackson would have approved of that change. He spoke to the California State Association of the Bar while an associate justice on the Supreme Court. His talk is one of those rare 60-year-old speeches that remains completely relevant and indeed is very pertinent to today's Supreme Court. He correctly noted that the justices do indeed rely heavily on oral presentation, and he urged his clients to choose their lawyer based on skill rather than prominence. He cautioned the lawyers against wasting their time flattering justices. He noted that we justices think well enough of ourselves already. Now, I will have to leave it to others to decide if that's changed since Justice Jackson's time. Jackson urged the advocate to maintain focus on key arguments, and he pointed out that questions should be welcomed. As he put it, it is clear proof that the inquiring justice is not asleep. Jackson recognized that the purpose of the argument is always and only to assist the court in resolving a legal dispute. He saw oral advocacy as a high art and knew from his own experience that a skilled lawyer must have a rounded life and balanced judgment to draw inspiration from reason and practical experience. Justice Jackson was a wonderful advocate in his day, and I believe he would be no less so in today's changed environment. Now, when the courtroom arguments are completed, it is time for the justices to take a vote on the case, and we retire to the justices' conference room, the same conference room where Justice Jackson met with his colleagues to discuss Brown versus Board of Education and the other momentous decisions of his era. Now, it was, of course, not true in Jackson's day, but today he would see a large portrait of himself, one of only 4 portraits in the room, hanging on the wall, supervising the work of today's court.